I'm Chief Commercial Officer at Delta Think, and I'll be moderating today's session. And I'm joined by a great panel, Michelle Potter, STEM Collection Strategist, University of California, Riverside, Keith Webster, Dean of Libraries and Director of Emerging and Integrative Media Initiatives, Carnegie Mellon University, and Amy Pulowski, Executive Director of Ohiolink. We'll start off with each of our panelists providing opening comments, and then we'll move into the Q&A. As a reminder, this is set up as a Zoom meeting to allow for a lot of interactivity and so we can see you all. But to limit the distractions, we ask that everybody please mute their mics and turn their video off during the presentation portion. So thank you again for joining us, and I'm going to turn over to our first speaker, Michelle Potter.
Hello, is everyone seeing my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I am, as Lori just mentioned, I am Michelle Potter, the STEM Collection Strategist at UC Riverside, and I am honored and excited to be part of this panel. And I'm going to be speaking today from my own personal experience on using data to maximize resources in a serials crisis. So I'm going to start with a lively anecdote of my first serials review in 2019. It was 2 to 3 months after starting this is my first ever collections only position. And I was looking at 200 journals or small packages from a local subscription agent for a total of about $200,000. And I knew immediately that what I needed was some usage data. So I dropped down a deep hole into password land where I lived for 2 months. And then when I emerged, I was able to cancel $65,000 worth of journals with a total actual known usage of 777. And with that, I turned around and purchased about 15 resources for about $50,000. And one of those resources has been used since then 7,631 times. That is a video education product, and I had no way of knowing that that use would be anything like that, and I hope that that's a sustained usage. So takeaways from my first serials review. There has got to be an easier way to do this. And number 2, local non-package purchases have significant flexibility. And number 3, I gained a deeper understanding of the value of using data in making decisions. And then flash forward to my second serials review. My team and I had spent the year implementing sushi in our OMA ILS. It took me 2 days to get the information that I needed to make $15,000 worth of cancellations, about 18 titles. And now my current STEM CPU with that subscription, or actually any of our local subscription agents for journals where I actually know the usage, is about $2.97. So I'm convinced still that data is pretty cool. So what can I know from my data? I can know a lot of things about UCR. I can know our use, our publishing, our cost, our user composition, our programmatic strengths, our needs, our barriers, and things I don't even know yet that I can know. And what can I do with my journal data? I can, on a local level, I can cancel, negotiate, save space and time, purchase, subscribe to new things, and help my users understand the hard decisions that we have to make. On a slightly broader basis, I can suggest refinements to improve products and processes, and I can share my experiences and my data in hopes that it will be useful to somebody else. But there are things I can't answer on my own with my own data, and some of these are philosophical and some of these are just complicated, and I call these my ponderable questions, like what if usage data is not available? What information can I get to help me make decisions? What is an appropriate cost per use, and on what does it depend? And what is the importance? How can I advocate for this instant access or ownership rather than just waiting until things are needed and scrambling to try to get it? And I have some pictures here from my ponderings. All of us will recognize the picture in the middle as clearly a race against time, but the picture of the bug on the left, that is the citrus psyllid that is slowly eating the entire world citrus industry. That is a race against time that my campus is involved in. And of course, we're all racing to get information to our students so that they can get out of being students and go become productive members of society with a knowledge of how important information can be in their lives. And another set of ponderable questions: what if not owning it means we can't get it, which is why I invested in a video education product, which I can't get through interlibrary loan. How can I increase the use of what we do have? And when is this a good idea, or should I just give up and save some money? And who would benefit from research being done at UCR who can't get it? We are not the only people working on the Asian citrus psyllid issue, and the more we share, the faster we will, I believe, the faster we will solve these problems. So I also want to know how data can make me a better advocate for the scholarly enterprise in general. So my relationship with big packages is a little bit complicated. I mentioned earlier that local packages and local subscriptions, local individual titles, I have a lot of flexibility on. We have significantly more access, though, than we did in 1996, when I think we had maybe 1,600 journals total. I didn't look that up, so it's just like a deep memory. And it's so much easier not to manage thousands of titles on a title by title basis when 2003 titles, or 203 titles, almost broke me in 2019. And yet, how do we know when these packages are worth it? How do we know when we're actually making the best use of our money with these big packages? And we need some really robust evaluation tools to use that. Sushi worked great for me for individual titles on a local basis because because I had cost data for each of those. But when we're talking about packages of 2,500 journals, how efficient will it be for us each to enter those costs into a spreadsheet in order to do those calculations? It will not. Though while I was here in Charleston, I learned about a new thing, not necessarily new, definitely new to me, unsub, which I'm definitely going to be looking a lot closer at when I get back to work. So what can we do collectively with our collective journal data? We can explore the issues we are all facing, develop and refine tools to assist each other in making good decisions. And I've just put here some citations of my favorite articles from the last year. We can keep researchers and other stakeholders in the loop generally. And we can send coordinated feedback requests and ideas to publishers and vendors. And it's also useful to know a little something about the industry of publishing and library data in general for advocacy, ideas, and negotiations, such as how many more good articles, researchers, and journals there are now than there were in 2010 or whatever other arbitrary year I could have put in here. How much more expensive is the average journal than that time? How have library budgets changed since then? And what does it cost to run a journal or publish an article? So how do I think we are going to solve the crisis? I think we're going to solve the crisis by getting all of the good information we can, sharing our information with each other, with our administrators, and with our stakeholders, asking and answering these ponderable questions together, trying and assessing new things and failing some of them, and then trying newer things, crazy ideas that just might work. And I break my crazy ideas into various different categories, and these are some of the ones that I've broken it into for the cereals crisis issue. And these lists can just get longer and longer, and we can explore them, and we can ponder them, and we can break them, and we can see what we can come up with in the end that might be sustainable. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope that this will be a wonderful, lively discussion. I'm really looking forward to it. And if you'd like to continue pondering with me, I have my contact information on the slide. We are all in the same boat together. Thank you very much. And now let's hear from Keith.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. And hopefully you can see my screen. It's great to be here. It's my first Charleston conference. Unfortunately, it's not in Charleston, but it is wonderful to be with you all. I wanted to begin with this quote, which I know is specifically about the big deal, but it perhaps begins to tease out some of the challenges that those of us in the library space have had to wrestle with for some time. That, in a sense, we are perceived, not openly, of course, as not being particularly good at negotiating. And I do think since 2012, when this quote was captured by a stockbroker from a somewhat unfortunate conversation, that we have seen a greater attention to negotiation skills and data-informed negotiations amongst librarians. Let me begin very briefly, and I should say that I'm going to go through my slides very quickly. I've put them, if I just flick back to my title slide, there's a DOI there and a link to our institutional repository where you can pick up these slides. But just to begin to answer this question about the serials crisis and to call out what's going on there. And many of us are familiar with these tables and charts, but we can see the red line at the top showing a 20-year price increase trend for cereals compared to general inflation rates, the black line at 54%. So you can see these prices going up. And at the same time, our share of total university expenditure has declined over time. Arguably, that is not as drastic as it looks because institutional expenditures have gone up, particularly in research universities due to increasing funding for research, but nevertheless, it doesn't paint an elegant picture. Meanwhile, publishers will point to their side of the argument, which is over that same period, that investment in research has yielded many more articles, and we have to cover the costs of publishing them somehow. And perhaps even more interestingly, when we look at a share of world scholarly output, we see that China has come from almost nowhere to just about overtaking the United States in its share of output. And Chinese articles, in some cases, require more editorial work. There are other aspects to publishing Chinese literature, but they're not necessarily seeing the revenue from the Chinese market. And all of that makes for a very messy situation in which we as librarians find ourselves negotiating. I've made the point in a circuitous way, but I'll just make it overtly here, that we need to remember that we operate in a global marketplace for scholarly journals. When we deal with Elsevier or Wiley or pick your favorite publisher or society, they are selling to institutions around the world. And they often are having to cope with different competitive drivers or different market forces in different jurisdictions that might impact on their ability to respond to what might feel like a perfectly reasonable request from the perspective of your individual library or consortium. And it's important to have an eye to things like the state of foreign exchange rates and how publishers might be exposed, how libraries might take advantage of that. So just a place I just call that out. As we begin negotiating, we need to understand what it is that we are trying to achieve. And the ideal position of getting all of the above, whatever the above might mean, is not something that we can necessarily always strive for. And we need to prioritize what it is that we are trying to secure. It might be we need to save money, we want to maximize licensing content that gives us a particular return. We want to maximize the openness of our faculty publications as examples. And understanding that as you enter the negotiation phase, as you begin to address your lived experience of the serials crisis is an important part. It's fairly well known that at Carnegie Mellon over the past year or so, we have embarked upon a number of transformative open access agreements, and we could debate ad nauseam whether these are read and publish or publish and read. I've never understood the difference, but what you see is some of the stuff that we've been able to achieve. The big ticket item in terms of PR was our institutional agreement with Elsevier, which gives everyone who is a corresponding author with a CMU affiliation automatic open access when they publish with Elsevier. And similar agreements have rolled out in recent months with ACM and PLOS, and we have a few others in the pipeline. And that brings to the forefront a need to think about different types of data. Whenever I begin to negotiate with a publisher, whether for an open access agreement or a standard subscription, I break down the data that I'm trying to gather into these three broad buckets. What can I tell about the publisher's business, and what can I find from their SEC filings and other disclosures? And we don't have time to go into that today. What can I tell about how we are using our current licenses, things like cost per download, which journals are being used and not used? Again, others are talking about that. I'm more interested in our interactions with the publisher's content in terms of what we contribute. And also I have an eye to what else we are spending with the publisher. So as I think about our interactions with scholarly content, clearly there's the readership bucket. There is the use in terms of what are people not just looking at, but what are they citing? Are they citing things from a publisher that we don't license, and how are they accessing that? All of that sort of stuff. But then from an open access and transformative agreement perspective, there is the question about creating. Where are our community members placing their articles? Are they publishing with a publisher that I'm about to negotiate with? Are they publishing with a different publisher? And so on. It's important to understand the importance of mandates and the directions that particular research funders are taking in the context of open access. And I'll illustrate that in just a moment. What I have been doing as I prepare for publisher negotiations is taking a very close view at what I can find out about our publications as a university with individual publishers. And I use a myriad of tools, but Dimensions is the one that gives me easiest access to a view by publisher. This is the Dimensions landing page. I've added the Carnegie Mellon organization as a filter, but I can begin, as you can see on the left-hand side, to facet my search by publisher type. And you can see the main window on the right showing publisher by publisher over a 10-year period, the number of publications, the number of citations, and the average citation rate. And that can allow me to begin to understand how important we are to a particular publisher. I can see that, I can play around with that in different timelines. I can begin to build heat maps that show how that plays for my faculty's publications by publisher and by research funder. And I can understand there what I'm hearing about any given funder's trajectory towards open access mandates. So there's just something I can call out there, that Elsevier publications from CMU faculty funded by the NNSFC, 453 publications, and I can look at those paper by paper to see who my key researchers are, who are our key authors in that particular window. And I could reverse engineer all of this and look at Elsevier publications with a particular funder and see how Carnegie Mellon compares to MIT and Stanford and Tsinghua and others. I can see our publishers by volume and look at field citation rates, average citations, publications with altmetric counts as opposed to citation counts, and see how important we are. And this was certainly a critical element of a number of our negotiations earlier in the year. And I can generate windows through deeper dives into how our faculty are choosing to publish in different shades of open and closed access publishing. And not surprisingly, I can also begin then to look at differences, which is interesting as a side conversation to talk to faculty about, in terms of the fact here that it seems that if you publish a gold article with Elsevier, you're going to attract greater citation rates and greater attention. which is really what researchers are looking for. So beginning to build a detailed understanding of how we are publishing is an important part of the overall picture as we negotiate. Understanding also how we are sending other bits of money to any given publisher is important. This is an attempt to show the list of products that Elsevier generates, showing just how much money we might be spending either from other parts of the library or other bits of the university. So that can also be an important discussion point in negotiations. The amount of money we are spending on open access articles also can be important. And finally, understanding how our faculty are relating to any given publisher in terms of roles as editorial board members, as editors, is something that we can discern either from publishers or from our faculty profiles on the library website as a way of leveraging our connections if we need them. I've galloped through this very quickly. I have a number of presentations on this and related themes. You can see I spent the summer talking at webinars, and you can pursue those in greater detail or reach out to me. With that, I am going to stop sharing and hand on to our next presenter.
Hello. Good afternoon. My name is Amy Pulowski. I'm the Executive Director of Ohiolink. And I'm going to try to quickly get through how we are gathering and using data at Ohiolink and kind of how we got to where we are with our data program. So just really briefly, Ohiolink, I think most of you know, is a consortium of 116 member libraries. We have a broad spectrum of institutions. We have public institutions, private institutions, community colleges. Of our institutions, we have 5 ARLs. So a real broad spectrum. Quickly, our services, we share a print collection. That's how Ohiolink started. And then we negotiate and share a group of e-resource contracts, ebooks, journals, research databases. And then on top of that, we support some technology services. So we have, as most of you know, the Electronic Journal Center, where we load locally and host the journals that we purchase and the ebooks. We have an ebook center too. And then we help our members maintain access for content on our database platforms. We have an open electronic theses and dissertation platform. We have a central catalog, so that's how we're sharing all of our print resources that's managed from the center. We do centralized cataloging for our services, so anything that's purchased through Ohiolink, we have catalogers that create catalog records and distribute to our members. We have a large affordable learning initiative where we're working with members on OER resources. You know, we're working through inclusive access contracts to help bring pricing down. And then we have a collaborative e-tutoring program that some of our members participate in. So speaking of data maturity, I'm going to start with where we are, and then I'm going to tell you a quick story about how we got there, and hopefully you can pick up a couple tidbits on how you might want to think about your program at your institution. So I can really put how we collect and analyze data into 2 categories. So business decisions. So very much what Keith and Michelle were talking about, gathering content for resource evaluation and to assist with negotiations, to gain a deeper evaluation of new initiatives and potential initiatives. So, you know, if we're looking at new content, is there purchasing at the local level, gathering that information, evaluating our print sharing program, watching what's moving across the state, and thinking about, are we perhaps, is there an opportunity to pick up electronic versions of that content? And then derive cost allocation. So how we figure out the cost allocation for a given contract for Ohio. And then also on top of that, it's to tell our story and inform our stakeholders. And I am really proud of the work that that we've been doing in this area. So it's making sure, Ohiolink is a government agency. We report up to the Ohio Department of Education. So I think it's important to make sure that when we are doing data gathering and analysis, that we're able to put that into language that's easily digestible for government officials to prove our effectiveness and our value. And then for our members, excuse me, and then for our members as well. So can they use this data to help prove their effectiveness locally and the efficiencies that they have locally, excuse me, as they work through dealing with their budget on their local campus. So how did we get there? Back in 2013, when I started at Ohiolink, there was some documentation outlining pest analysis, but nothing really documented heavily. We had annual reports that contained some data points and analysis, but we really didn't know how those numbers were gathered or if they were gathered the same year over year. And then there was no formal process to collect and store and use the data for evaluation. So, a cadence to how frequently we're gathering the data, making sure that we're doing it at regular intervals and at the same time, and collecting and analyzing in the same way. So how did we get to where we are now, which is we are doing all of those things. We began an organizational rebuild in 2013. Gwen Evans was the executive director at the time, and then I was brought on as the deputy director. And then we quickly moved into a plan to help better gather and analyze data. And we started by hiring a data analyst positions or a collections analyst position. Okay. We hired Joanna Voss in 2014, and Joanna Voss kind of hit the ground running. So what we started doing was getting to how we want to collect and be more efficient on how we're doing it. So what is that? We quickly defined goals of analysis for content package, and it really kind of started with me asking Joanna a bunch of questions about value and use in our packages. And then Joanna would gather and run these evaluations. And then she also had the foresight to start thinking about operational needs and how documentation would keep our data program efficient. So documenting, like I just said, the cadence in which we're collecting, exactly how we're collecting that data, and then making sure that we're replicating that every time we do a data collection and an analysis. So we were gathering this data and working through this. It did take some time though, with our data gathering around the business portion of all of this, we have a resource committee that meets every month. So the importance of how we aggregate that data and then how we use it was key that the executive director was coming to the resource committee meeting, right? So I had all of my resource committee librarians on the calls, in the meetings, and then the executive director at the time was coming to those meetings as well. So we were understanding the data as a whole of an organization. It wasn't just somebody collecting data and hoping it trickles up or trickles down. We were all on the same page about how we were reviewing and using that data. Okay, so longevity. So we've made some business decisions, and we wanted to make sure that we had consistent data points and analysis for the content packages and their shared print, and that it was documented. Our print sharing metrics are measured with the same process year over year, all documented. And then we have kind of a process for how we're looking at new initiatives. So what type of data are we gathering and analyzing and are integrating into our project plans? So, if we're looking at a potential new ebook package, we're taking a look at how print books are moving across the state and how our members might be spending money on a particular vendor or publisher. We're taking all of that into account as we move forward. So the second piece of this is the telling our story. So we're doing a lot of planning. There's a lot of marketing metrics and timelines that we have, where we're looking at our metrics to help show our value and quickly show our value. Things you see in real quick data point flyers. And then really quickly, I want to show you some of the pieces that we have. I do want to point out that data gathering and analysis is not enough, especially if you're just using it to look at, you know, how you want to purchase your content moving forward. I mean, it's very, very important, but I think at the same time, you need to tell your story and really get to making sure that people understand the value of your organization. So 2 quick examples. This is just a quick, when we're meeting with our resource committee, and we're talking about a negotiation, just a quick snapshot of year-over-year costs, the usage that we see in that particular package, the cost per use, the negotiated increase that's year-over-year, and then any notes that we have that might help us decide how we're moving forward with a particular package. And then second is a screenshot that I was talking about of telling our story. And this again, you know, this hits government officials, but it's also something that our member libraries can use as well when they're talking about, you know, membership in Ohiolink and how that brings them value locally. And then another example of telling our story. So this was screenshots from some data we were showing in our member magazine. So kind of getting to how we're showing print use versus e-use across the state to specifically our members. So I was trying to go through it really quickly so we have some time for questions. So I'm going to wrap it up, and I think we're going to start taking some questions now.
Yes, great. Thank you. Great presentations, everyone. So I'm going to, I think I'm going to start with, you know, the $64,000 question, if you will. And that is, how has the COVID crisis affected your statistics overall, and or your use of statistics? What impact has that had? Who wants to start on that one? Keith, or
Maybe.
Keith. Yeah, either.
If I stick with my theme about published output as being an important component of any publisher negotiation, I think what we have seen is a decline in the volume of published content for a variety of essentially supply chain delays, either because of the interruption and the shift to online education. Many in the university community had to scale back or slow down their writing, their reviewing. So my sense is we're seeing a bit of a dip in traditional published output that will doubtless bounce back. But we've also seen a huge explosion of content relating to COVID-specific research. And if you look at something like Dimensions, you will see 160,000 publications in 9 months. So, you know, shifting seas, but certainly our regular compare to prior year doesn't work. And we need to accept that data, longitudinal assessment of data will be very different for a couple of years at least.
Yeah, so to follow up on Keith, an example for Ohiolink is, you know, how we're tracking print lending across the state. We shut down print lending because our institutions were closing, you know, in March, April, and then we didn't pick lending back up until August. And we've been watching our print lending and its trends and thinking about how it's declining and trying to evaluate the best path forward for Ohiolink. So I think that COVID, I think, is going to throw a wrench in how we're evaluating that data, because, you know, we're not going to have a lot of data over 2019 for how content is moving across the state. But I also think it's going to affect, kind of maybe accelerate the borrowing of print across the state. So, you know, we had been projecting the past 3 or 4 years what we thought our print movement across the state would look like. And this past year, I think, is really just going to change our projections in a very different way and accelerate things more quickly than we were anticipating.
Well, I will, thank you. Yeah. I will say from the usage perspective, obviously, our print usage is way down. And because of that, we're not really buying print unless it's specifically for a very particular reason, obviously then our e-usage is way up, and we had to scramble to get a lot more e-resources on the ground when spring quarter hit. Also, we now have a lot of data on the publishers were very generous at offering free access in the spring to a lot of resources we would not necessarily have purchased. So we have a lot of data to go through on resources we would not necessarily have had access to. So definitely it has accelerated our need to analyze data. And the question of whether that use is going to be sustainable beyond this period of time is still up for grabs.
Can I just add something to that? You reminded me of an interesting project that is being done at a neighbouring university, so you can guess which one that is. Because of that exactly same situation, there is a huge amount of proxy log data that OCLC can help, if you're using Easy Proxy, to mine, to begin to understand better connections at the level of user type. Ordinarily on campus, people log in using Shibboleth, and there's no real understanding of what undergraduates are working with or what historians are working with. There is an ability at a time when everyone is connecting via a proxy server to do much deeper analytical work to help inform longer term decision making.
Thank you. Just a quick question, Amy. We had a question on which software you used for your infographics.
I just quickly
I see you answered that in the chat.
Yeah. So we do have we're lucky that we have we're part of OTEC, so we have a shared communications and marketing department. So the graphics that I flashed up were all custom made by a graphics professional. That said, there are a ton of programs out there, infographic programs out there that are easy to use and drop in data points and get out nice looking materials.
Great, thank you. Let's see. We've got some, just looking through whether we've got comments or questions in here. Going back to some of our questions. When you present data to your stakeholders, are there particular pieces of data that you can see really resonate, that are really the ones that catch people's attention, and what stakeholders are really focusing on when you need to make presentations using the data or make arguments using the data? I'm going to
pull up, I'm going to go back 2 slides here because it's this slide here, right? So when you start getting to, when we're looking at interactions with the content, this one's really big. Students, faculty, and staff interact with Ohiolink resources every 1.2 seconds. It's actually gone down. We just did a data check. It's down to 1.1 second now. That one resonates really well. For government officials, it's the value statements that really resonate. The average cost of an academic book is $98 versus $2.40, which is the average cost to ship a title around. So, avoided costs for students, end users strike a good chord. Getting over to this average cost statewide, this is actually lower again. It's gone down to about $56 per student. So those tend to resonate really well with government stakeholders.
Great. I'm going to, because we only have a few minutes left, I'm going to cut in with another question here that I think will be good to hear from all of you. So is there any data in particular that you wish you had that you can't seem to get, or challenges collecting or assessing or analyzing the data, really getting to what more would you like to see, what more would be helpful?
I find I can generate a huge amount of data, and frankly, I don't want to pierce a hole in what we're talking about, but we can generate much more data than we need for most negotiation purposes. That said, I would love to be able to do more cost modeling, comparing what I see at my university with what I see at peer institutions. And I understand, we need to avoid any sorts of potential legal challenges that our lawyers have warned me about in being too open and sharing data, but getting a better sense of usage and pricing and whether or not what we are seeing is in line with what our peers expect. If I know that I see 1 million downloads from publisher A, would a similar sized institution with a similar profile see the same sort of download activity? Or do they see twice as much or half as much? And what about pricing and cost per download and how that compares?
Thank you. Michelle, do you want to?
Sure. I think that the kinds of data that I am always looking for and can't find would be sometimes like itemized costs of our various different resources that we buy in packages. Like, what would it cost to cancel? What benefit am I getting, in terms of percentage for bundling? But also, what are other people's costs and uses? Just like Keith was saying, to know that a particular resource is used thousands and thousands of times at another university could really help me with my decision making. And honestly, outside of non-disclosure agreements, knowing what other people are paying for resources would be enormously helpful, and has been enormously helpful when that information has been available. Yes, thanks.
Amy, anything to add to that?
Yeah, actually, Alice Pierman just posted a statement, and it's a great one. And,
Yes.
and I want to read this and then make a comment about it. So she's saying, I'm hearing a lot of data collection this week, but what are the questions we hope to answer with this data? We should define the questions first. It is just to use our money wisely, making sure subject areas are evenly represented in our collections, question marks, other questions. So this is exactly it. And a lot of times, there's a lot of data out there, and you can pull a lot of data and look at a lot of things. And a lot of the times when we're talking about, let's look at this data, we'll stop and step back and say, well, to what end? What are we trying to answer with this question? And I think that's really important to ask yourself these questions like Alice has suggested. Otherwise, you're just going to find yourself digging around in a bunch of data holes and not really getting to the answers that you need.
Yeah, definitely. We're just at time, but we have a couple of more questions and lots of people still on the line. So if we can hang in there. We've got a question here from Dee Dee. Is there an efficient way to ID an article's corresponding author? Do you rely on publisher provided data? Anybody want to tackle that?
Yeah, we provide on publisher provided data, and we've been finding that when we've been asking publishers this question, we're getting very different answers because they're using different tools and collecting that data in a different way. So I suppose that could be one of my frustrations when you were asking about what could be better. It would be nicer to see that more uniform coming out of publishers.
Yeah, and I see, Keith, you answered in the chat too. And then we've got another question here regarding data presentation. Our unsub users tell us that the 5-year forecast showing cost versus fulfillment over time is a very useful graphic for them. Is that something that you find useful as well?
Sorry, go ahead. No, I was going to move on to another question.
Oh, okay.
Well, we don't use unsub at Ohiolink, so I really can't answer that.
Yeah. Okay.
Keith?
I wanted to call out Angela's comment from West Virginia about ROI.
Yeah.
That's something I've wrestled with for many, many years because it's part of my own background. But I was involved in a study when I was a Dean of Libraries in Australia for a few years, and we were trying to understand ROI from the end user's perspective, but it's incredibly difficult because end users don't pay by and large, and certainly not in a university environment. So we embarked upon a contingent valuation study which is the sort of thing that we might see used in trying to value the ROI of something like a national park or a beach. People don't directly pay, but you can begin to talk to them about the substitution costs if they were to try and recreate that environment on their own. Now, from the library perspective, we can begin to look at things like how much would you have to pay to buy a copy of an article if your library didn't subscribe, or how much time would you have to spend emailing your friends in other universities to send you copies of articles, and begin to roll that up into some sort of valuation of the ROI at a bundle or aggregate bundle level. And so there are lots of interesting approaches there, because I do worry about having to make budget cut decisions in the face of usage data alone, and taking a bigger level approach makes me feel more comfortable about this.
In a niche discipline, yeah, it can be difficult for sure. Any closing comments you folks want to make? We are out of time, and lots of good discussion. I'm not seeing any more specific questions. So, is there anything, Amy, perhaps starting with you? Any last comments anyone wants to share?
There's been some really great comments in the chat, and I know that you can review the chat after the session closes. So that would be my last comment, is if you haven't gone through the chat comments or questions, you might want to do that. I think there's some good content there.
Yeah, I agree.
Could I maybe just build upon your earlier question about COVID-19 and say that in our daily lives, we have seen a digital acceleration in recent months, whether it's online shopping or telemedicine or streaming movies. And those accelerations were made possible by the fact that those initiatives were already underway. Netflix had been around and was growing and has exploded. And we are exactly in the same situation in libraries. We've been providing electronic journals, ebooks for some time. Our data are showing the same digital acceleration. A core question for us is, how do we seize this moment and think about post-pandemic librarianship and information delivery?
For sure. Michelle, any closing comments?
Well, yes, I would love to say how much I really enjoyed this conference and how much I really feel that this is the place where I have had the greatest experience in pondering, in seeing people's questions and getting new questions and finding new resources. So this conversation is obviously not over. And I would just love to see it happen, in water coolers, at conferences, and everywhere else that we can have a chance to have these conversations.
Great. Thank you so much. Clearly a topic of great interest and lots of information. So more to come. Let's hope. And so that's a wrap for today's session. Thanks everyone so much. Thank you to the panelists. Great discussion, great information, lots of information packed into your slides today too. So I hope everyone enjoyed it as well, and stay healthy and well, everyone.
Take care. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.